There is a moment in a 1999 episode of The Simpsons where a character holds up a newspaper. The headline reads, "Robotic Workers Replace Thousands." The crowd in the background does not panic. They cheer. That image sat in a cartoon for 25 years before the world caught up to it. And now, we are in April of 2025, and the numbers coming out of Silicon Valley are not subtle anymore. Over 200,000 white-collar jobs have been flagged for automation replacement in the first quarter alone. Not factory jobs, not manual labor. Accountants, paralegals, copywriters, radiologists, the kind of jobs people spent 4 years in university preparing for. The Simpsons did not just predict artificial intelligence. They predicted the reaction to it, the acceptance, the applause from people who did not yet realize they were clapping for their own replacement. What makes April particularly unsettling is the rollout of the next generation of autonomous decision-making systems. 3 of the largest technology companies on Earth have announced AI models that no longer require human approval for operational choices below a certain financial threshold. They set that threshold. You do not vote on it. You do not see it. It just happens quietly in data centers running on power grids that now consume more electricity than most mid-sized countries. Springfield always had a nuclear plant humming in the background. Homer never quite understood what was happening inside it. Neither do we. And the writers knew that was the point. May move forward 30 days and the temperature shifts. Not metaphorically, literally. In a 2006 episode, Lisa Simpson stands in front of a melting globe and delivers a presentation that her class ignores. She shows graphs. She shows projections. She names a specific tipping point. Her teacher changes the subject. May of 2025 is bringing what climate scientists have been calling a compound heat event across 3 continents simultaneously. Southern Europe, South Asia, and the Horn of Africa are expected to experience record-breaking temperatures within the same 2-week window. Not record-breaking for their regions, record-breaking for recorded human history. Insurance companies in 4 countries have already quietly begun pulling coverage from coastal and high-temperature zones. They do not announce this loudly. It appears in updated policy documents buried in legal language. By the time most homeowners notice, the window to switch providers has closed. Lisa's presentation was ignored. The reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released in late 2024 said, in language rarely used in scientific documentation, that several environmental thresholds are now irreversible within any human-relevant time frame. The media covered it for approximately 48 hours. Then a celebrity scandal took the front page. Springfield moved on too. It always does. But here is what the show kept returning to across dozens of episodes. The problem was never the disaster. The problem was the practiced, deliberate, culturally reinforced habit of looking away. May is when the looking away starts to cost something real, and the cost, like always, falls on the people who were never in the room where the decisions were made. June. By June, the script changes again. This time, the camera moves from the environment to the economy. In a 2010 episode, Homer stumbles into a financial seminar where a man in a sharp suit explains how debt can be packaged, resold, and made to look like an asset. The audience nods. Homer nods. Nobody asks the obvious question. The obvious question, as it turns out, was the only one that mattered. June of 2025 is arriving with warnings from 3 separate central banks about what economists are calling synthetic credit exposure in the consumer lending sector. The structure is not identical to 2008. It never is. Each financial crisis wears a different costume, but the skeleton underneath is the same. Money that does not quite exist, owed by people who cannot quite pay it, held by institutions that cannot quite afford to absorb the loss. The Bank for International Settlements, which most people have never heard of, but which essentially functions as the central bank for central banks, released a working paper in March flagging leveraged exposure in the private credit market at levels not seen since the pre-collapse period of the last major crisis. It was a working paper, not a headline, not a warning siren, a working paper. Homer would have changed the channel. What makes June the pressure point is the intersection of rising consumer debt, stagnant wage growth in the middle income bracket, and the upcoming refinancing cycle for commercial real estate loans taken out during the low interest rate era. All three of these things are hitting the calendar at the same time. The Simpsons did not predict the specific numbers. They predicted the specific attitude, the shrug, the glazed look, the assumption that someone smarter is handling it. Nobody is handling it. That is what the episode was actually about. July. Summer arrives and the tone of the script hardens. There is a 1995 episode where Springfield gets divided. Not by war, not by ideology, at least not explicitly, by a wall, by a literal, physical barrier that goes up overnight and splits neighbors from neighbors. The episode plays it for laughs, but the shot of children on opposite sides of the barrier, pressed against the chain link, looking through at each other, does not feel like comedy. It never did. July of 2025 sits inside what geopolitical analysts are calling the most fragmented period in international cooperation since the Cold War. Not one single flashpoint, multiple simultaneous pressure zones. The South China Sea shipping lanes are operating under what Taiwan's Coast Guard is now officially describing as persistent interference patterns. The Baltic states have each independently increased defense spending beyond NATO targets for the first time in history. 3 separate peace negotiations on 2 continents have collapsed in the first half of the year, with no new frameworks scheduled. And here is the piece that does not make the news cycle but should. The global early warning communication systems that were built after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the hotlines, the protocols, the agreed-upon delay windows before escalation. Several of them are currently operating with personnel gaps due to budget restructuring in the administrations responsible for staffing them. The wall in that Simpsons episode did not go up because of hatred. It went up because of paperwork, because of a miscommunication between 2 municipal departments, because nobody was paying close enough attention at the moment it mattered. July is that moment. The summer heat makes people irritable. Decision cycles shorten. And somewhere in a room that has no windows and no cameras, people with authority over systems most of us cannot name are working with less information than they need and more pressure than is safe. Springfield built its wall by accident. That is the part that should keep you up at night. August. The predictions do not slow down in August. They accelerate. In 2015, The Simpsons aired an episode centering on a surveillance system installed across Springfield under the guise of public safety. Every street corner, every school, every private home with resident consent, obtained through a terms and conditions agreement nobody read. Sound familiar? August of 2025 marks the scheduled rollout of what the European Union is calling its Digital Identity Framework, and what critics within the EU Parliament itself are calling something with considerably more teeth. Every participating nation-state, all 27 of them, will begin the process of linking biometric data, financial records, health history, and movement tracking to a single, unified digital profile. The opt-out mechanism exists. It is real. But opting out means losing access to certain public services, certain financial institutions, and in several member states, certain forms of employment verification. In Springfield, the residents loved the surveillance system at first. It made them feel safe. It solved a minor crime in the first week. The mayor held a press conference. Then someone started using the data for something other than public safety. And by the time Springfield noticed, the system had already been integrated into too many other systems to remove. The show ended that storyline without a resolution, because the writers understood something important. These stories do not end. They just become the background of everyday life until nobody remembers what it was like before. August is when the background changes, and once it changes, it becomes the new normal. Silently, permanently, without a vote, without a headline, without a moment anyone can point to and say, that was when it happened. September. September brings something different, something that comes not from below, but from above. There is an episode, often listed among the show's most quietly eerie moments, where a character looks up at the night sky over Springfield and sees something moving that does not move the way stars move or planes move or satellites move. The scene lasts 11 seconds. No character speaks. Then the show cuts to a commercial. The writers never explained it. In September of 2025, NASA's Unexplained Aerial Phenomena Task Force is scheduled to deliver its third annual report to Congress. The first two reports, released in 2022 and 2023, used language that would have been considered extraordinary in any previous decade. Non-human. Intelligence was not a phrase that appeared in those documents, but objects demonstrating performance characteristics beyond known aerospace capabilities was, repeatedly. The September report is expected to go further. Multiple Intelligence Committee members, both Republican and Democrat, have made public statements in the months preceding the release that suggest the findings are, in the words of one senior senator, not something the public is prepared for. That is a remarkable sentence for an elected official to say out loud. The Simpsons' 11-second scene becomes more interesting when you know the episode aired in 1993. When you know that the Department of Defense had classified programs running at that time that were not declassified until 30 years later. When you know that entertainment has historically functioned as a soft introduction to ideas that power structures are not yet ready to announce directly. Springfield looked up, then looked away. September is the month where looking away becomes significantly harder. October. The tension has been building for 6 months now. October is where it compounds. There is a Halloween special, one of the show's annual Treehouse of Horror episodes, where technology and biology merge. A corporation releases a product that integrates directly with the human nervous system. It is marketed as a wellness device. It is sold in pharmacies. It is endorsed by a celebrity. And then, quietly, in the fine print, the user discovers that the device also collects neural response data and sells it to a third party the user has never heard of. The episode is played as horror. In October of 2025, 3 of the largest neurotech companies in the world are scheduled to begin their first phase of consumer-facing brain-computer interface products, not implanted devices, not surgical, wearable headsets that read electrical signals from the scalp and translate them into data. The data. The terms of service for one of these products, reviewed by a digital rights organization in advance of launch, contain a clause that permits the company to share anonymized neural pattern data with research partners for purposes including product development, behavioral modeling, and third-party licensing. Behavioral modeling. This is not science fiction. This is an October product launch with a marketing budget and a celebrity ambassador, and a wait list of over 200,000 people who are excited about it. Springfield's residents signed up for the wellness device too. They were excited about it right up until the moment they were not. And by then, the data was already in a server farm in a jurisdiction with no privacy laws to speak of, and the terms of service had been updated to reflect the new arrangement, and everyone had clicked, "I agree," without reading it, because we always do, because they designed it that way, because they knew we would. October is when the horror episode stops being a metaphor. November. There are 22 days between October and November that the show seemed to anticipate in a way that is almost impossible to explain away. In 2008, a Simpsons episode depicted a national election in a fictionalized version of the United States where the voting system itself became the subject of the story. Not the candidates, not the policies. the machines, the infrastructure, the question of whether the result being announced was the result that actually occurred. The episode did not take a side, it just asked the question. November of 2025 does not carry a presidential election in the United States, but it carries something in some ways more structurally significant. Midterm elections across 4 major democracies, including 2 in Europe, where far-right nationalist parties are currently polling within single digits of majority government for the first time since the 1930s. And hovering above all of it, like static in a signal, is the documented proliferation of AI-generated political content. Not crude deepfakes, sophisticated, seamless, emotionally calibrated content designed by systems that have studied human psychology at a scale no human propagandist ever could. The election integrity organizations monitoring these cycles are not saying the systems will be compromised. They are saying they cannot confirm the systems will not be. That is a different sentence. Springfield's election episode ended with nobody quite sure what had happened. Life went on. The show went to the next episode. The characters made breakfast the next morning and argued about something else. November is the month where the argument we are not having is the one that matters most. The Simpsons always understood that the most dangerous political moment is not the one that looks like a crisis. It is the one that looks like Tuesday. December. And then we reach December, the last month. The prediction that the writers seem to have placed deliberately at the end of a specific sequence, as if they knew something would need to be saved for last. In 2021, a Simpsons episode aired that centered on a global event so disruptive that the characters of Springfield could not process it using any of their existing frameworks. It was not a war. It was not a natural disaster. It was a revelation. Something that recontextualized the events leading up to it in a way that made characters look back and say, all of those things were connected. We just could not see the shape of it from inside it. The writers called the episode The Last Temptation of Homer, Part 2 in early drafts. They changed the title before air. December of 2025 is the month that multiple separate threads, the AI expansion, the environmental tipping points, the economic pressure, the geopolitical fracturing, the surveillance architecture, the neural data collection, the unexplained aerial, disclosures, and the election integrity questions, all of these threads reach the end of their individual trajectories at roughly the same time. Not because someone planned it, because systems that are all under pressure at the same moment tend to interact. And when large interconnected systems interact under pressure simultaneously, the outcome is rarely predictable from inside any one of them. The Simpsons has been running for 36 years. It has produced over 750 episodes. Statistically, some predictions will land. A show that depicts American life week after week for nearly 4 decades will occasionally describe the future because the future grows from the present, and the present was always Springfield. But there is a different explanation, one the show itself flirted with in a 2003 episode, where a character discovers that the layout of Springfield contains a hidden pattern, a geometry that only becomes visible from above, a map to something that the residents living inside it could never perceive because they were too close. December is the month where, if you step back far enough, you can see the geometry. Not one prediction, not a lucky guess, a pattern. 9 months of interlocking pressure points converging on the same calendar. Climate, economy, technology, surveillance, space, democracy, biology, conflict, revelation. The writers of a cartoon sat in a room in the 1980s and built a fictional town that somehow kept describing the actual future. Maybe they were just good writers. Maybe they understood that human systems are not random, that they follow logic, that power concentrates, that technology expands, that nature responds to what we put into it. that people in rooms with no cameras make decisions that reshape the lives of people who will now never know their names. Maybe Springfield was never a satire. Maybe it was always a map. And if it was a map, then December is not an ending. It is the moment you finally understand the territory you have been standing in all along. The question worth sitting with is not whether The Simpsons predicted the future. The question is why we are more comfortable believing it was coincidence than believing it was pattern recognition by people who were paying closer attention than the rest of us. Because if it was pattern recognition, then the patterns are visible. Then the future is readable. Then what is coming in the next 6 months is not fate. It is a choice, and choices can be changed by people who are willing to see them clearly. Watch the show differently from now on. Watch the world differently, because the warning was never hidden. It was on television, every Sunday night, for 36 years, and we called it a cartoon.